The most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. Something truly messed with me one night, and I still can't shake it. I was living alone in this small, old apartment downtown. One night, I was working late on my laptop in the living room. Around midnight, I got tired and decided to take a short nap on the floor with my back against the wall. I wasn't fully asleep, just drifting in and out. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I jerked my head up, thinking maybe I'd knocked something off my desk or imagined it, but nothing was there. I chalked it up to being tired and tried to go back to dozing. Then I heard it, a very faint, almost whispered breathing right next to my ear. My skin went icy. I froze, thinking it was just a weird dream, but the air smelled faintly metallic. I slowly turned my head toward the sound. There was nothing there. I was about to convince myself it was my imagination when I noticed that all the photos on my wall had been turned upside down. Not slightly tilted, completely upside down. I live alone. No one had a key. My phone was across the room, and I debated getting up, but before I could, I felt a cold, wet touch brush across my hand. I screamed and jumped back, but again, nothing. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright against the wall, clutching a baseball bat, staring at the door, half hoping, half dreading that someone or something was still in the apartment. When morning came, there was no sign of forced entry, nothing taken, no footprints. I moved out 2 weeks later. I still don't know what happened that night. I never want to find out. Story 2. I was walking home from school alone, taking a shortcut through a quiet alley I knew well. Out of nowhere, a man in a dark hoodie stepped from behind a dumpster. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me. My stomach dropped. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. He held it out toward me and whispered, "I know where you live." My heart froze. I didn't know what to say. I just ran. I ran faster than I ever had before, not looking back until I reached my front door. When I peeked out the window later, he was gone, but the piece of paper was sitting on the curb where I'd been standing. I never touched it, never told anyone. I don't know what was written on it, and I've never walked that alley again. Even now, I get a sick feeling remembering how calm he was, like he already knew I couldn't escape. Story 3. I was staying at a friend's old house for a weekend. At night, I woke up to the sound of soft scratching coming from the ceiling above me. I thought it was just rats or the old pipe settling, so I tried to ignore it. A few minutes later, the scratching turned into slow, deliberate tapping, like someone was walking on the floor above, but the house only had one story. I froze. Then I heard it, a whisper, very faint, coming from right beside my bed. I didn't dare open my eyes. It said, "I see you." I bolted upright and flipped on the lights. Nothing was there. The house was empty. My friend was asleep across the room, and all the doors and windows were locked. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I left the next morning and haven't been back. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it knew I was alone. Story 4. Something really shook me, and I still can't stop thinking about it. I was walking my dog late at night through an empty industrial area. The streets were quiet, and most factories were abandoned. My dog suddenly stopped and growled at a dark corner between two buildings. At first, I thought it was just a shadow. Then I saw movement. A figure crouched low, completely still, staring at me. Its face was hidden under a hood, but I could feel its eyes. Every instinct screamed danger. I tried to back away slowly, but it started moving toward me. No hurry, just deliberate. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I turned and ran down a side alley, dog pulling me, scraping my hands and arms. When I finally made it back to a well-lit street, the figure was gone. No footprints, no car, nothing. Just gone. Even now, I avoid that area entirely. Story 5. I used to work the night shift at a massive empty warehouse. One night, I was walking through the storage aisles with my flashlight, checking locks and inventory. The building was silent, too silent. I reached the end of one aisle and saw a shadow move across the floor. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard whispering, soft, urgent, coming from a row of boxes I hadn't passed yet. I called out, "Hello." No response. My heart was racing. Then I saw it, a pair of eyes peeking out from behind the crates. Not reflecting light, just there, watching. I ran toward the exit, but the doors were locked. I could hear footsteps echoing behind me, slow and deliberate, but every time I turned, nothing was there. When I finally got a coworker on the phone to let me out, the warehouse was empty. No doors had been opened. No one had entered. I quit that job a week later. Story 6. A few years ago, I was house sitting for an older friend in their old countryside home. The house was huge, mostly empty, and had long hallways that echoed every little sound. One evening, I was in the living room reading when I heard faint giggling coming from upstairs. I thought it was my friend's kids visiting, but I knew they weren't there. I called out, "Hello." Nothing. Curious, I went upstairs. The laughter stopped immediately. I walked to the end of the hallway and noticed a small, dusty room I'd never entered before. The door was cracked open. I peeked inside. It was empty, but then I saw it, a tiny chair rocking back and forth slowly by itself. My heart slammed. I froze. A whisper came from the corner of the room, "Don't leave me." I bolted down down the stairs and out the front door, shaking. When my friend returned later, I asked about the room. They swore it had always been locked and no one had entered in years. I never stayed there overnight again. Story 7. A few years ago, I was staying in a small old townhouse that had a sort of off feeling. Nothing dangerous, just a quiet, almost suffocating stillness at night. I was alone that week. My roommate was out of town, and I was used to hearing the creaks and groans of the house settling, or so I thought. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up because the sound of whispering drifted through the hallway. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The house was old and made weird noises. But then it became clear someone was moving in the hallway outside my bedroom. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My stomach sank. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but the doorknob rattled slowly. Then a soft knock. 1, 2, 3. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. My roommate's key was with her. The front door was locked. Windows shut. My phone was in the kitchen, too far to reach safely. The knocking stopped. I held my breath. Then came a whisper, so soft I could barely hear it. I see you. I sat up, heart pounding, and saw a shadow pass in the corner of my room. Not human exactly. Too long, too thin, almost stretching across the wall. I couldn't move. My brain screamed run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Then the whisper came again, louder this time. Don't leave. I don't know why, but something compelled me to stand. Slowly, I edged toward the door. The shadow followed me, always just in the corner of my eye. When I finally reached the hallway, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked every corner of the house. No one. No sign of entry. No footprints. Nothing. Story 8. I was staying at my friend's family cabin in the mountains for a weekend. The place had been in their family for generations, tucked away at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by thick woods. The kind of place where silence isn't peaceful. It's heavy. The first night, everything seemed normal. We stayed up late playing board games, then went to bed. I was in a small room on the second floor with just a single bed and a window overlooking the woods. Around 2 a.m., I woke up because the floorboards outside my door creaked. I froze, thinking my friends might be up. The creaking stopped, but then I heard something else, a soft tapping like nails on wood, coming from the closet. I didn't have a closet in that room. The sound moved closer, circling around the bed. My heart was racing. I told myself it was the wind. Then a whisper came, low and urgent. Don't look. I stayed frozen, eyes wide open in the dark. The whisper came again, louder, closer. Don't move. Suddenly, I felt something cold brush against my arm. I yelped and flipped on the bedside lamp. Nothing was there. The room was empty, but the window was open, even though I was sure I had closed it. I sat on the bed, trembling, and glanced toward the corner of the room. That's when I saw it, a shadow that wasn't mine, stretch along the wall, moving as if it were alive, with no visible source. It paused in the corner, just the watching. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I told my friends what happened. They laughed and said, "Oh, that room is weird. People have felt things in there before." I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. Story 9. A few years ago, I started noticing strange sounds at home. It wasn't like someone was playing music. I could never locate a source, but in the dead of night, I'd hear faint melodies drifting through the apartment. Sometimes it was a piano, sometimes a violin, sometimes voices singing, though I couldn't make out the words. At first, I thought I was going crazy. I'd be lying in bed, wide awake, trying to focus on the silence, and suddenly these haunting notes would float into my ears. The strangest part was that every time I got up to look around to check if maybe a neighbor had left music playing, it would stop immediately, as if it knew I was listening. It started happening almost every night. Sometimes the music was beautiful, melancholic, and soft. Other times it was harsh, grating, repeating the same few notes over and over until it drove me nearly insane. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling, convinced something or someone was in the apartment with me. After weeks of this, I was ready to see a psychiatrist. I was convinced I was losing my mind, but my doctor suggested I see an audiologist first, just to be sure. The audiologist ran tests. My hearing was normal, both ears fine, but he asked me if I'd had any ear infections in the past months. I remembered a minor infection I'd had a few weeks before the first strange night. He explained it. I had a condition called musical ear syndrome. Essentially, because of temporary hearing loss from the infection, my brain was filling the silence with hallucinations of music. My mind had been creating these melodies to compensate for the missing input from my ear. Hearing the explanation was a relief and terrifying at the same time. I hadn't been crazy. My own brain had been tricking me. He told me it would gradually fade as my hearing returned to normal. And over the next few months, the music slowly stopped, like someone had finally turned it off. I'm glad it was music, not voices or or something malicious. Story 10. I was around 14 or 15 and had a small paper route in my neighborhood. One summer evening, I was walking my dog to deliver a letter to the end of a long, narrow alley that cut through the backyards of two streets. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that makes every rustle in the trees sound like footsteps. As I rounded a corner, a man stepped out from the shadows, tall, unkempt, and wearing a hood. He blocked the alley completely. "Hey," he said casually. "What time is it?" Normally, I would have answered, but something about the way he was standing made my skin crawl. I froze. My dog, a gentle giant who had never growled at anyone in his life, stepped directly in front of me. His hackles raised, teeth bared, low growl rumbling in his throat. The man froze for a moment, then slowly raised his hands. My dog's growl grew louder, and he started barking like I'd never heard before. Sharp, insistent, protective. The man took a few cautious steps back and disappeared into the shadows of the alley. My dog stayed on guard until he was completely gone. I never heard him growl or bark like that again, ever. And even now, when I walk alone in quiet streets at night, I remember that feeling, the sense that something was just wrong about that encounter. The weird part, I've walked that alley hundreds of times before and after that night without incident. Nothing about the neighborhood changed, but I can still see that man stepping out of the shadows, and I can still feel my dog's protective presence. It was almost like he knew something I did. Story 11. When I was about 10, I used to stay at my aunt's house for weekends. She lived in an old Victorian home with high ceilings, narrow hallways, and a staircase that creaked like it was groaning under some invisible weight. My favorite room was the guest room in the attic. It had slanted walls, a big window, and an old rocking chair in the corner. It was slightly odd, but I never thought much of it until one night. I was lying in bed reading a book, the only light coming from a small lamp on the nightstand. Outside, a storm was brewing. Rain pounded against the window, and lightning flashed in the distance. I fell to watch. I tried to shrug it off, but then I noticed the rocking chair. Slowly, ever so slowly, it started to move. Not in the usual creaky way a chair would move if the wind caught it through the slightly open window. No, this was deliberate. Back and forth, back and forth. I froze. The room felt heavier, the air thick. The sound of the storm faded until all I could hear was the soft scraping of the chair against the wooden floor. My heart was pounding. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint, almost like the sound of the rain coming from the corner. It said my name, my own voice almost. "Don't leave, don't leave." I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. The chair stopped rocking. Silence. Then I felt something brush against my shoulder. I jerked my head around, and the chair was empty. Nothing moved. Nothing was there. Before I tell you what happens next, don't forget to like and subscribe. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, maybe the storm, maybe my own shadow. I closed my eyes, but when I opened them again, I swear I saw the chair slowly rocking toward my bed, even though nothing was touching it. I screamed so loud I woke my aunt. She ran upstairs, furious that I was yelling. I tried to explain what I saw, but I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. She turned on the lights, and the chair was back in the corner, still motionless. I never slept in that room again. Even now, I avoid old rocking chairs. I don't care if it's antique or expensive, doesn't matter. Something about the way they move, like they know you're watching. Something about that night has stayed with me. Story 12. I was staying at my uncle's house for a week during the summer. He had a big yard with an old shed at the far end. Nothing inside ever seemed unusual, just gardening tools and old boxes. But that week, something fell off. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when his cat suddenly started hissing and running in circles, hair standing on end. The wind wasn't strong. There was no one else outside, and the cat had never behaved like that. I tried to ignore it, but a few minutes later, I heard faint footsteps coming from the shed. They weren't hurried. They were deliberate, slow, almost like someone was pacing. My heart started racing. I called out, but no one answered. I got up to peek inside the shed. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and everything looked normal, but the air inside felt wrong. Heavy. I stepped back, and the door slammed shut behind me. I swear I didn't touch it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing scratching sounds at the windows and soft tapping against the walls. At first, I thought it was the old house settling, but then I realized the noises were deliberate, rhythmic, like someone walking around, checking every room. The next day, my uncle told me that a man had recently been seen lurking around the neighborhood, trying to break into sheds and garages. I immediately put the pieces together. The cat's panic, the footsteps, the tapping. Whoever or whatever had been inside that shed had been testing the house, watching me. By the end of the week, I was constantly on edge, sleeping with the lights on and checking every corner of the yard. I don't know if the man man returned, or if it was something else entirely. I just know that even now, when I see a shed or an empty yard at night, I feel that same icy dread. Story 13. I was visiting a friend in a city I didn't know well. We spent the day hanging out, exploring, grabbing drinks, and just having a normal fun time. My friend lived in a small apartment complex. Nothing fancy, just a few buildings close together. Later that night, I was heading back to my own hotel when I noticed someone following me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but every turn I took, the same shadowy figure seemed to mirror me. My heart started pounding. I tried to pick up the pace, but so did they. I ducked into a convenience store and waited, pretending to browse, but when I left, they were gone. I breathed a sigh of relief until I realized they were now standing across the street, just watching me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anyone in the city well enough to go to their place, and my hotel was a 15-minute walk away. I started running, zigzagging through side streets, but every time I glanced back, I could see the figure keeping pace, always at a distance, never making a move, just watching. My stomach turned into knots. I finally made it to a lit main street with more people around. The figure hesitated, then melted into the shadows. I ran the last block to my hotel, slammed the door, and locked it. For hours, I sat awake, listening for any noise outside my room. The next day, I asked the hotel staff if anyone suspicious had been seen in the area. They said there had been reports of a man following guests, but no one had been caught. The thought that someone had been stalking me, following me step by step, and I hadn't known their intentions, stayed with me. Story 14. I used to spend a lot of time alone in my family's old attic. It was dusty, full of old furniture and boxes, and the kind of place that always seemed to creak even when the house was perfectly still. I liked it because it was quiet, private, a place to tinker with old electronics and gadgets I collected. One weekend, I was there late at night, working on a small clock radio I was trying to take apart and fix. I had left it in pieces across a blanket on the floor and went to get a screwdriver from the box of tools. When I returned, something was different. All of the tiny screws, gears, and components I had painstakingly laid out weren't just moved. They were rearranged. Every single piece lined up in neat rows, perfectly spaced, almost like a diagram. My heart started racing. I lived with my mom and younger brother, but neither of them had gone up there. The attic door was still closed when I left it. I spent hours trying to figure out if I had somehow done it in a sleep-deprived haze. I didn't remember it, and no one else had been in the house. Over the next few nights, I started noticing other strange things. Small objects I was working on would be taken apart while I was out of the attic, safely put back together, but in ways that showed someone knew exactly how every mechanism worked. Tools would be slightly out of place. Manuals open to the pages I'd need next. At first, I thought it was a prank, but no one had access, no one had the skill to do it, and my family swore they hadn't touched a thing. Eventually, I accepted the idea that I was being helped. Whoever or whatever it was knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't trying to scare me, just guide me. It was unsettling and comforting at the same time. I started leaving more complex gadgets up there, and each time, pieces would be gently rearranged in ways that taught me how to put things back together. Years later, I realized I could now take apart and repair almost any small device I own. I don't know if it was my imagination, a spirit, or something else entirely, but every time I fix something today, I think about that mysterious presence in the attic that somehow guided me. Story 15. I was in my bedroom one night, reading before bed. The light was on, the hallway light was on, and my door was open. Everything seemed normal. Then I sensed something. Movement, maybe like a ripple in the corner of my vision. I looked up toward the open door. Nothing. I shrugged and went back to my book. A few seconds later, I noticed it again. Out of the corner of my eye, something just barely at head height moved behind the doorway. A blur. Too fast, too deliberate. My heart started pounding. I rubbed my eyes and looked down at my book, trying to calm myself. But then it appeared again. This time I got a full glimpse. Something was staring at me, grinning. The smile wasn't human. It was stretched too wide, too sharp, and possibly wrong. Its form was vaguely humanoid, like it wanted to look like a person, but every angle, every line screamed that it was not. It ducked back behind the door in an instant. I froze, every muscle in my body locked. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow, but the image burned into my mind. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of air felt like it was stalking me. I kept the lights on and refused to move. By morning, the feeling didn't fade. It lingered in the corners of my room, like it had left something behind. The next day, I grabbed a notebook and tried to draw what I saw to prove to myself it wasn't just a dream. The drawing is tucked away somewhere in a box now. now, but the memory is as vivid as ever. Its smile. That impossible, mocking smile. I've never told anyone much about it because I can't explain it. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something that knows you're watching and enjoys it. Story 15. I was on a solo hike in a remote forest in the Pacific Northwest. I'd heard rumors of an old abandoned mining site hidden deep in the woods, so I decided to see if I could find it. I had been hiking for hours, surrounded by dense trees, fog rolling in, the kind that makes everything feel muted and strange. Eventually, I came across a clearing with crumbling stone walls, what had been a small mining shack, and stopped to take pictures. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic drumming, like heavy footsteps, echoing through the fog. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe wildlife, but then I heard whispers, my name soft, insistent, coming from all directions at once. I looked around. The clearing was empty. The trees swayed with no wind, and then I saw them. Shadows, tall, humanoid shapes gliding silently just beyond the tree line. Their movements were too fluid, too deliberate to be animals. I couldn't see faces, just darkness where heads should be. I froze, heart hammering. The drumming grew louder, almost deafening, like the earth itself was vibrating beneath me. The whispers became chanting, words I didn't understand, but every syllable felt like it was pressing into my skull. I tried to step back, but my feet felt rooted. Then I smelled it. Something foul, like burnt wood and decaying leaves, but sharper, more metallic. It made my stomach churn. I turned toward the smell and saw nothing, just fog and shadows. And the drumming, always the drumming. Panic set in. I dropped my pack, hands over my ears, trying to block it out. My vision blurred. Every instinct told me to run, but something about the rhythm compelled me to kneel, to lower my head. My body felt like it was betraying me, wanting to obey something invisible. Then sharp pain, right at the center of my forehead. I was sure I was having a seizure. I collapsed to my knees, fighting to breathe, praying for it to stop. And then suddenly, the pain vanished. In its place was a strange calm, a sense of acceptance, like the forest itself was telling me I would be okay if I kept still, if I respected whatever this was. The drumming faded, the chanting quieted, and then a single, piercing horn sound shattered the silence. I instinctively covered my ears. When I looked up, two glowing orbs hovered above the ruins, then drifted silently into the fog. I left the forest without looking back, heart pounding, legs shaking, and didn't speak about it for days. Later, I learned from a local guide that I had stumbled into a spirit march, an old legend about miners who died in the woods, wandering the forest at night, guarding their land. People who encounter them alone are said to feel intense fear, pain, and visions, but none who have shown respect have been harmed. Story 16. I was waiting outside my elementary school with my older cousin. My mom was running late, so we were sitting on a bench near the bike racks. There were kids everywhere, teachers walking around, and parents picking up their children. It was completely normal until a car pulled up. It was old, faded blue, kind of car you never forget. The driver rolled down the window and called out to me, "Hey, Emily, need a ride home?" I froze. I had never seen this man in my life. My cousin, who was a year older, looked confused too. The man wasn't calling to anyone else, just me. Funny enough, my cousin was wearing a jacket with her name embroidered on it, but he called my name, not hers. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't casual. It was deliberate, like he had been waiting for me specifically. I didn't answer. I stayed glued to the bench, heart pounding, and when my mom finally pulled up, I ran into her arms. She got out of the car, saw the man in the old blue car lingering for a moment, and immediately called the police. I gave them a description, the car, the man, everything. They asked around, but no one knew who he was. No one came forward. The officers said it was lucky I didn't approach him, and that this kind of thing sometimes happens, but that didn't make me feel any better. For years, I couldn't stop thinking about it. How did he know my name? Why was he targeting me among all the kids? The idea that he might have been watching, waiting, just for me, was horrifying. Story 17. When I was about 10, my parents took me to visit my grandmother's old farmhouse. It was the kind of house that had been in the family for generations. Creaky floors, long hallways, and a big attic full of forgotten things. I loved exploring it, even though it always gave me the heebie-jeebies. One night, I was in my room reading before bed. The lamp was on, and the door was slightly ajar. I thought I heard a soft giggle from the hallway. I paused, listening, and then the lamp flickered. Thinking it was just a bulb, I shrugged it off and went back to my book. A few minutes later, I felt the temperature drop drastically. My breath fogged in the air. I glanced toward the hallway, and for a brief second, I saw a small figure standing there. It looked like a little girl in old-fashioned clothes, maybe a century out of place, just watching me. She wasn't moving, but the air felt heavy, like she was waiting. I froze. I told myself it was my imagination, but then I heard whispering, soft, almost like the wind, but I could make out words. "Come with me." My heart pounded in my chest. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to block it out. The next morning, I told my grandmother, and she got very quiet. She explained that children in the house sometimes sometimes see the old family. There were stories of kids and visitors glimpsing figures that looked like long-dead relatives, just standing silently in corners, watching but never harming anyone. Years later, my own kids would experience similar things when we visited. My youngest once refused to go into a particular hallway, saying a lady with a long dress kept staring at her. My other child told me about two boys in old clothes playing silently in a living room while everyone else was elsewhere in the house. When we turned to look, no one was there, but they swore they weren't imagining it. Before I tell you what happens next, don't forget to like and subscribe. Story 18. We were on a walking trail near a small lake trying to get some exercise after our first baby was born. It was late afternoon, sun just starting to dip behind the trees, the shadows stretching long across the trail. The area was mostly empty, except for a few joggers in the distance. As we rounded a bend, we noticed an elderly woman walking toward us. She looked frail, hunched over, and used a cane. She was wearing a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. We smiled politely and stepped aside, letting her pass. We started talking quietly about how slow she was moving, glancing back every few steps, but when we turned again, she was gone. Completely. We were certain we hadn't walked past her yet. My husband swore he had just seen her hunched over, moving slowly, cane tapping against the path. The trail curved slightly, and there were small rises in the ground, but nowhere for someone to hide completely. We scanned the area. Nothing. No hat, no coat, no cane, just empty trail and the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. We shrugged nervously, thinking maybe she had turned off the path behind a tree or a bush. The trail we were on had no side paths, and the nearest road was a solid 10-minute walk away. Later, when we were back home, we described her to each other in detail. Everything matched perfectly. The long coat, the wide-brimmed hat, the cane. And yet, there was no logical explanation for where she had gone. No alley, no side path, no way she could have disappeared that quickly. I've walked that trail hundreds of times since, sometimes alone, sometimes with my husband, and I've never seen her again. But every time I walk by that bend, my stomach tightens, and I feel certain I'm being watched, even when the trail is empty. Story 19. I was moving some furniture out of an old rental property I'd been staying in. The place was in a small industrial complex. Lots of long rows of warehouses with gates that locked at night. My unit was all the way in the back, at the end of one row, completely isolated. I parked my car nearby and started carrying boxes out to the truck. A few minutes in, I noticed a van pull up at the other end of the row. 3 men got out, looked around, and started talking quietly near another unit. I didn't think much of it at first. They could have been moving too. But then I realized they kept glancing toward me. About 20 minutes later, one of them started walking in my direction, casually, like he was just strolling. But he came way too close to my car, as if trying to see if anyone was paying attention. I froze. There was literally no reason to cut across the open space between my car and my unit. They could have walked around it easily. Then the van slowly rolled past me. I don't remember exactly what was said, but one of them gave a weird half smile and wave. My instincts screamed that this was not friendly. I grabbed my pepper spray, the one shaped like a little flashlight, and kept it ready in my hand. Minutes later, they circled back, slowly this time, the sliding door open, laughing quietly between themselves. My chest was pounding. My hands were shaking, but I kept myself calm and made it obvious I wasn't alone. I raised the pepper spray just enough so it could be seen if they looked my way. They paused for a second, as if recognizing the warning, and then drove off. I stayed in the car for a long time, doors locked, waiting to see if they'd come back. They didn't, but the feeling of being watched, of someone sizing you up while you're completely isolated, didn't leave me for hours. Story 20. I have a little boy who's very curious and talks a lot, even as a toddler. We live on a small property that backs onto some woods. At night, the house is very quiet, so quiet that you can hear the faint rustle of leaves outside or an owl in the distance. One night, I was putting him to bed. He always has this little routine. We say goodnight to the trees he can see from his window, then the garden, then the animals outside. That night, he paused and said, "Good night, Mama." I thought it was cute and assumed he meant my wife, who was downstairs. But when I told him she was downstairs and we'd said goodbye, he tilted his head and said, "No, other Mama." I laughed nervously, thinking he was just being imaginative, and tucked him in. But this kept happening. Every night, he'd pause at the window and wave, talking to someone I couldn't see. Sometimes he'd say, "She's sad," or "She's watching." I tried to brush it off. Kids say weird things, right? Then things escalated. He started waking up crying in the middle of the night, pointing toward the window, whispering, "Don't go, Mama." My wife, who is very spiritual and comes from a culture where people are sensitive to spirits, insisted we call someone from her hometown who could help. The man called us that night. He instructed us to put salt in the corners of the room and performed a blessing over the phone. At the end of the call, he told us something that still makes my hair stand on end. There is a spirit in your home. It's not dangerous to the child, but she is here. A mother who lost her child long ago. She comes by, she watches, but she will not harm you or your son. We hadn't told him anything about the child or the window incidents. He had no way of knowing, but the details matched exactly what our son had been saying. Since then, my son occasionally waves out the window and says good night, but he never looks afraid. My wife believes the spirit just stops by to check on us. I'm still skeptical about a lot of things, but seeing my little boy so calm while talking to someone invisible, that creeps me out to this day. Story 21. When I was about 15, my mom brought home a man she had met online. I barely knew him existed until he appeared in our living room one evening. She seemed thrilled, but my sister and I immediately felt uneasy. He was strange, foreign, and had this weird, predatory smile that made my stomach twist. He ended up staying for a few days, even though we made it clear we weren't comfortable. From the start, he was rude, condescending, and kept giving me these quick, piercing looks that made me feel like I was being evaluated, like a trapped animal. He constantly made little comments about how I looked, how I should act, and even started telling me I was useless if I didn't obey some random request. One night, he was being particularly aggressive. He grabbed my mom's phone when she was trying to record him being inappropriate and smashed it against the wall. I froze in terror. He wasn't subtle about being intimidating. He slept on the kitchen floor and would just stare at us from time to time, silently waiting. After a few days, he finally left, but not without one last weird moment. My mom texted me asking me to hand him a frying pan she had lent him. I went to give it to him, and the moment our eyes met, I felt this electric chill run down my spine. It was like he could see straight through me. Later, my mom casually mentioned that he had escaped from a psychiatric facility. Police eventually got involved, but the memory of him still creeps me out. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.